Well, as you know, the U.S. is pushing for a legally binding backed UN security resolution that would stop the recruitment of these men into the Islamic State. Is this a real possibility that this would stem the flow?
Well, I think the UN Security Council resolution has to be seen in the political context in which it's emerged. This is sort of what a president like Obama would do. You want to galvanize international support for what he's attempting to achieve in the Middle East, and the Security Council resolution brings the international community on board. In that sense, it has a very important symbolic effect, but what its actual legalistic impact will be is far less certain.
And what about, we've all seen now these three horrific videos that come from IS, and that one individual dressed in black in the desert backdrop. Indications are he's a Brit. Let's talk about the number of people from other countries who apparently are joining this organization, now 31,500 strong. The real concern about these people going back to Great Britain, the United States, Australia, and we've heard the British authorities talk about having some very austere measures to try and combat this. Legally, how difficult is it going to be to find a way to preserve civil rights, yet crack down on these thugs?
Well, that's exactly it. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. It's this balance between civil rights and national security. And the problem is one of evidence, usually. We have fairly rigorous legislation to stop these sorts of things already. Certainly, if it didn't exist prior to 9/11, it was created shortly thereafter. Now, of course, there are always additional loopholes that can be closed. But the real problem is not the loopholes, it's the evidence. How do you know whether someone is going to the field to conduct some sort of terrorist attack? And how do you know upon the return that they are across the board going to continue such behavior within your home country? Do you want to have a blanket condemnation? Or do you want to try to do a case-by-case assessment with the risk that you may get some calls wrong? And the effects, of course, will be atrocious, not just politically, but also for those caught up in it.
The UK is talking about monitoring online communication, sharing airline passenger information, and criminalizing those who are traveling abroad who are not supposed to be to some of these areas. Is this what you're talking about in terms of the legality, if this is legal?
Well, I think the states can already do quite a lot if you can establish that there is a terrorist motive. And various European states have various sort of thresholds of evidence for that. And of course, what you're allowed to do with that evidence also differs on a case-by-case basis. But intelligence sharing, information sharing, certainly, for example, given that Turkey has for long been the main thoroughfare for these fighters, negotiating with the Turkish government, share information, have certain blacklists of individuals that are known to have Islamist sympathies, that they can't travel on to Syria and Iraq. But ultimately, it will depend very much on what each individual state is willing to do and how they balance the counterterrorism efforts with other strategic and political priorities.
You just talked about something I think is very important, what Turkey is doing right now, because it has been the country many people have pointed the finger at. Your porous borders have allowed people to come and go. What is it doing? We heard President Obama this past week say Turkey is now stepping up. But when I was in Iraq about a couple of weeks ago, there was a lot of concern that the Turkish borders were open, allowing tankers to come up from Erbil and other areas carrying fuel that the IS is able to sell in the black market, then get more money, use it for recruiting. So it's a vicious cycle. Is Turkey really stepping up to the plate?
Well, I think it may be a little bit too little too late, to be honest. Unfortunately, of course, everything that we're seeing in relation to ISIS and what's going on in Syria is steeped in a longer history, one of what many people see as legitimate opposition to the Assad regime. And Turkey, of course, their policies originally, I think, stemmed from that perception. Now, of course, with Turkish citizens kidnapped by ISIS, right. Their opinions...
47 being held in Mosul right now.
Exactly, yeah. So their calculations have changed somewhat. But at this point, of course, they're going to change certain policies. But given the length of the border, and again, the multiple interests at stake, whatever they can muster at this point, in a sense, the damage is already done.
And so how would you go about apprehending and trying someone? Let's say if they finally get this man in all the video, it appears to be the same man in the beheadings. So let's say he's killing an American citizen, but he's British. What would be the process with that?
Well, that gets into very complex questions of jurisdiction, of course. And this is one of the key complications when you talk about foreign fighters. Do we have a universal legislation that can somehow establish jurisdiction for each country, for each citizen? No, not at present. And this may be one of those loopholes that will be created through the UN Security Council resolution or subsequent efforts. At this point, if you have a national of country A who goes to fight in country B and then goes off in country C, for whom is he a legal concern, and how do you actually process his case? Never mind the question of finding the evidence, of course, to actually get this through courts.
Alrighty. David Ucko, thank you so much, the author of Counter-Insurgency in Crisis. We really appreciate your time and insight today.
Well, thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.